Okay, so let us continue with the second part of the presentation on psychedelics. Okay, so if you look at this picture on the screen, I'm sure you're all familiar with it. If you Google psychedelics, you are sure to come across some version of this diagram. So these two pictures represent two versions of an adult brain. So obviously this is a schematic representation. This is not the actual anatomic representation of the human brain, but it will do for our purposes. So now, if you look at the picture on the left, shows an adult brain in its normal state. Different colors mark different regions of the brain responsible for different functions, such as hearing or vision. In an adult brain, the communication pathways between different regions are set. So they're stable and they don't change, and new pathways rarely form. It's a very well established and stable system. In addition, communication only takes place between regions of the brain that are responsible for the same function. So the regions that are responsible for hearing only talk to the regions that are responsible for hearing. The regions that are responsible for vision only talk to the regions responsible for vision, etc. So it's simplifying things significantly, in case there are some experts out there watching this speech, but it's not meant to be. It's meant to be simplified. So now look at the pictures on the right. You can see the difference. It looks much busier. So it shows an adult brain exposed to psychedelics. So you can see that the number of pathways has increased dramatically. But not only that, you can also tell by different colors that the different regions of the brain that are not normally connected can now communicate with each other. So, in other words, psychedelics expand communication between different regions of the brain in a way that we normally don't see. They allow for free communication between different regions. Now, the brain on the right resembles a child's brain. Now, as we grow up and our brain matures, it becomes more sophisticated. It can perform more functions easily. For example, grown-ups can make calculations more easily. They can focus their attention at a particular task for a longer time. We can easily detect certain causal connections, but this sophistication comes at a price. Our brain becomes much more rigid. It is now less able to think creatively, to perceive unconventional connections and patterns. Psychedelics shake our brain up. So they introduce chaos into a smoothly running, well-developed, well-adjusted system. As a result, our brain is now able to revert back to its childlike state. And this childlike state means that now we have an ability for imagination and creativity. We can see unexpected connections and patterns. Our brain is now easily amazed and fascinated. And as a result, the world that we live in, the everyday reality that we face, becomes more exciting, more vibrant, and more worthy of our attention. Okay, now, what is the experience like on the inside? Well, we have to remember that psychedelics are not party drugs. This is not a matter to be taken lightly. So despite the fact that under proper conditions, with the right preparations, the negative outcomes are extremely rare, but it's very important to take those things seriously. People describe the effect of those very powerful substances as one of the most profound experiences of their life. And many people compare it to giving birth or losing a loved one. And you have to remember that almost all of the bad incidents in the 60s happened because people did not know what they were doing and they did not know how to handle those drugs properly. Now, what are the positive effects that psychedelics can have? Well, the experience is akin to mystical or spiritual experience. People describe feeling one with the universe. They describe things like the dissolution of one's ego. And at the end of the experience, they're convinced that there is more to this world that meets the eye. But there are potential complications to watch out for. People can relieve childhood traumas, they're long forgotten. Certain suppressed emotions or memories may surface. Subconscious fears or phobias. So all this inner subconscious world that we manage to keep hidden from ourselves for most part of our adult life may come to the surface, and we will have to deal with it during the trip. One recommendation, for example, which I like, find it very interesting, you may encounter a monster during a trip. So instead of running away or hiding from it, you should approach it, you should face it, you should start talking to it, and you should ask it a question. You should ask it, what are you doing in my mind? What can you teach me? I found this was a very beautiful, kind of a beautiful metaphor for dealing with your own phobias, fears, and suppressed emotions, which many of us have. Now, what happens in terms of current research that I will talk about in a minute, when those experiments are conducted, of course, they have to comply with all the legal and ethical norms. Special attention is being paid to set and setting. So patients, experiment participants are psychologically prepared for what they're about to experience. And then after the substance is administered and throughout the session until the effect of the drug wears off, the patients are under constant supervision of the medical team, so which are psychotherapists or psychologists who typically have taken the substance themselves and they're familiar with its effects. And then after the effect of the drug wears off, the medical team is usually helps the patients to figure things out, to sort out or to interpret the meaning of their experience. Okay. So, current research involves studies that focus on whether psychedelics can be used in treating depression, addiction such as smoking or alcoholism, and in palliative care, whether it can help terminally ill patients to deal with the existential crisis in their life and the fear of death. And for the purposes of this presentation, I only have time to talk about the first two, but if you're interested in the palliative research, there is enough material out there. So let us first talk about depression. Depression is a hot topic these days. No surprise, because and this portion of my presentation is based on a TED talk. So 350 million people worldwide are suffering from depression currently, and in the USA alone, the medical costs of handling this disorder is about 200 billion a year. Now, when it comes to treatment, to response to treatment, then 15% of patients commit suicide from depression worldwide. Now, when it comes to treatment, 50% of patients don't respond to antidepressants. So they presumably respond to something else, but they don't respond to conventional treatment. And 20% of patients do not respond to anything at all. So no matter what they do, they cannot handle depression. Okay, So I'll just share the results with you. And these are the figures, the statistics for the use of psychedelics. The actual talk that this slide is based on gives, of course, both. It compares the statistics from conventional treatment with the statistics from the use of psychedelics. So here, just for the sake of my presentation here, I'll just show the results with you that obtained from the use of psychedelics. But the difference was significant. So after a single treatment, so the person was administered the substance once, all patients show at least some improvement for the next 3 weeks. 2/3 of the patients, or 67%, are free from depression at week 1. 42% of the patients are depression-free at 3 months. So after 3 months of a single dose of psychedelic substance, the person is free from depression. So this is pretty impressive, especially if some of you want to go and look at the actual talk and see the comparison between the figures. That's pretty impressive. And another example is smoking, and this experiment is described in this book, which I will share with you gladly after I'm done. So again, we're talking about a single treatment. So the person who is trying to quit smoking is administered the substance once, and I don't know if any of you here try to quit smoking, and if you have personal experience with, if you have your personal success rate that you can kind of interpret it in the context of these figures. 6 months later, after the single time, 80% of experiment participants did not start smoking. And when they returned 1 year later, 67% of them were still not smoking. So I think this is a potentially very useful and a very powerful tool to manage and if not eradicate completely, some of the illnesses that our society suffers from. And at this point, I will stop. I don't know if my 2 parts are equal, but that's what we were aiming for. In lieu of conclusion, trip responsibly. Somehow in this resolution, the picture got bigger, but that was the idea. And these are the sources if somebody is interested in learning more or verifying some of the information in my slides. So you can go through those sources. Thank you very much, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer.